Okay, we're going to get started in three, two, one. Welcome back to Event Horizon Podcast. Guys, I have the honor of interviewing Mr. Bart Sabrell. And for the few of you who don't know who he is, let me take a minute to introduce him. He's an award-winning filmmaker, writer, and investigative journalist. He's been producing TV shows and documentaries for over 35 years. He's worked at two of the three major networks and produced segments for ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN. Articles featuring Mr. Sabrell have been published in the New York Times, USA Today, the Washington Post, and Time Magazine. Mr. Sabrell has received the Best Cinematography, Best Editing, and Top 10 Director Awards from the American Motion Picture Society. He is known for a couple of very powerful and impactful documentaries. One called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon from 2001, and Astronauts Gone Wild, an investigation into the authenticity of the moon landing from 2004. He's the author of the books Moon Man, The True Story of a Filmmaker on the CIA Hit List, and Aliens from Planet X, The Origin and Future Appearance. In his memoir, Moon Man, he names 15 government officials, including a president, who was in attendance at a secret military base where the moon landings took or where they were faked. Mr. Sabrell, thank you for being on the podcast, and thank you for bringing truth to light. My first,
Mm.
my first question: why would NASA, with the government's blessing, fake the July 20th, 1969 moon landing?
Well, I may be saying this for the first time, but it's the way you phrased the question pricked my mind. Um, I don't really think it was NASA who came up with the scheme to fake the moon landing in and of itself. Now, they were kind of like maybe a bishop or a rook in chess, but they weren't really the ones supervising the faking of the moon landing. That was the Pentagon, the CIA, and if there was any branch of the military under them, it was the United States Air Force. And then NASA was basically forced, you could say, or pressured to cooperate, and they did to keep funding coming in. Um, your podcast is called The Event Horizon, and that's a unique title. There's something similar terminology called paradigm shift, where hundreds of years ago people thought the Earth was the center of the universe, the sun was the third heavenly body out, and then not exactly overnight, but in the long scheme of history, overnight, it changed, and it would be surely would be great if people suddenly realized they really did fake the moon landing that I had to go through, and I'm sure you had to go through too. Everybody grew up believing. There were a few people at the time who thought it was fake, but most people thought it was real. And then if they had an open mind, gradually began to realize if they can't go today, how could they go then? So yeah, this is one of those sad things that they did fake, and what can you do? Maybe the event horizon, the paradigm shift is on the horizon. That would be nice. It does seem like that could happen. And if it does, that would be a great moment in history for mankind, because really the faking of the moon landing is so much more profound than if they had actually gone. I mean, if you consider either they went, planted flag, came back, boy, I can't believe we survived. That was a close one. Or the government that is the most powerful in the world faked the greatest accomplishment of mankind, printed it on coins and stamps to add realism to it, and gave these guys medals of honor for being such good liars, and murdered people to cover it up, and embezzled billions of dollars. If that's true, which it is, you see, that's so much more profound. It really tells you more about human nature and mankind and governments. And when you realize that is true, and yet it's not officially known, then it's like having a cure for cancer that's being suppressed. We have this great truth that the government is so much more corrupt than we first thought, and spiritual implications of the modern day Tower of Babel being putting a man on the moon, and it also never being completed. You see, like the ship that God himself could not sink, which is what they said about the Titanic, and Nixon saying when he knew they weren't on the moon, putting a man on the moon is second in greatness only to God making the universe. So it's really a spiritually blasphemous event, and there is good versus evil, and that kind of surfaces first in truth versus lies, because people are doing the evil lie to cover it up. So that's the state of affairs. I wish it was differently, but it's better to know that you have cancer than to not know.
Right. And that's the thing that I am puzzled by. When you when President Kennedy threw the gauntlet down and said, we want to put a man on the moon, at some point they realized it could not happen and they were at a fork in the road. Admit that and then just move forward with history, or plan this new divisive route to take the entire world down and continue to roll that snowball of lies forward for tens of years, knowing at some point they'd have to face a reality. It takes a pretty crooked mind to not think that that lie at some point is going to come unravel. But they had to see a benefit from that lie to take the risk to do what they did.
Yeah, it definitely was a risk to fake it. It was a greater risk to force a deadline that would have killed the people on national TV. They should have just admitted they couldn't have done it and asked for more time. But that's what honest people would do. Now, in piloting terms, there's a phrase called the point of no return. So if I'm leaving LA flying to Hawaii, at the halfway point of fuel, I'm committed to going forward. If there's a problem and I have to coast, to a crash landing in the ocean or on another island, up until the fuel gauge is above halfway, I can always U-turn and go back to LA. At some point, there was the point of no return for the United States government. It appears to be when they killed Kennedy, but it could have happened before then, and it's hard to tell. If you believe, and I gather from your podcast, in the spiritual implications of what's going on in the world, about 7 years ago, which is a biblical number, there was a eclipse in America in 2017 that fell over the tallest pagan sculpture in America, the goddess Athena.
Mhm.
So tall that in the hand of the statue is a statue of a 6 foot tall man. And the government spent a lot of money painting that huge statue with 18 karat gold, you know. And so that's where the first eclipse fell. And then just last month, right,
Mhm.
it fell over Dallas, Texas. You see, I believe the point of no return when they killed their own president. And Bobby Kennedy Jr., who probably has more access to the JFK files than Oliver Stone does, it's his researched opinion with 100% certainty that his uncle was killed by the CIA because he was going to shut down that corrupt agency. And then Robert McNamara, who was defense secretary during the Vietnam War, which Kennedy canceled. And when Johnson took over, he immediately reinstated the war, but the public was against it. So the defense secretary and the CIA got together and they fabricated an attack from a North Vietnamese ship on an American ship. In fact, they said we need a Pearl Harbor type of thing, because prior to December 7th, 1941, 90% of Americans were against entering World War II. And in one day, 90% were for it to get even, you know? So he admitted before he died, the defense secretary, that that event just never happened at all. It was a complete fabrication, that the Congress passed a law. Do you understand? The Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution for no reason whatsoever except a CIA lie. So the CIA is controlling Congress. You see that?
Mhm.
But we're supposed to have elected officials. So the CIA is controlling Congress. The CIA is controlling the president. The CIA is spying on president's phone calls. I mean, no one asks when a private conversation between a president of the United States and a foreign leader, the transcript is published. No reporter has the sense to ask, how could you possibly get the private conversation of a president and another world leader unless you're an intelligence agency, which means the intelligence agencies are blackmailing presidents. And Robert McNamara admitted that before he died. And then there was a gentleman who worked for the NSA, a spinoff of the CIA, William Casey, I believe was his name. And he worked there for 30 years. And he said, we also spy on Supreme Court justices' private cell phone conversations in order to get dirt on them, to blackmail them to vote a particular way. And so if they're killing their own president, starting wars that kill their soldiers without cause, I don't think they're going to have a problem faking a video image. The problem is that, you know, whoever killed Kennedy, it's a tragedy. Whoever did 9/11, it's a tragedy. This is a positive lie. And I think it was Mark Twain who said it's easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. And there's also a quote by Carl Sagan who said, if you've been captured by a lie, it's very difficult to give it up because you'd be admitting that you're wrong and you don't want to admit it. And that's what there's all these videos of sincere people who are sincerely wrong defending the moon landings because it's a glorious patriotic scientific event and they love science or they love their country and they find it offensive that you would dare say that the crowning achievement of science or their country is a fabrication. And no matter what evidence, what proof you have, they will not admit it. Even a professor I talked to of aerospace said, even if an Apollo astronaut confessed on national TV that the moon missions were fake, he'd still think he walked on the moon anyway. And
Yeah,
I'm like, wow.
right. I read that in your book. I'm
So,
blown away by that.
yeah, and so my book that you mentioned, Moon Man, which is at Sabrel.com, it's interactive. There's 17 video links if you read a chapter and
Mhm.
you know go to a video to back up everything that I'm saying. And if you have an open mind, then you will unfortunately come to the same sad conclusion that I had to and you had to, that they really did fake the moon landing.
Right,
So much proof that they didn't do it. More proof, four times the proof than you need. And but it's this positive lie that people don't want to give up, and these naive people are defending their own murderers, their own embezzlers, their own liars. They're defending them, which is pretty sad. And I was thinking this morning about the founding of the United States of America, and there were people defending the tyrant King George, and they were members of Congress saying, no, 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 you know, we need to stay, you know, part of a colony of the greatest nation on earth. You know, it's just a few things he's doing wrong. It's not that bad. And at first, it was six colonies, four independents, and six against. And that's, you know, that's a lot of people defending their own tyrant, right?
right,
And things have gotten much worse now, so much worse
right,
now under the command of the federal government. Then King George would look like a saint
right.
compared to what the federal government has done. And yet people are defending their tyrant again.
Mhm.
And so I don't know what to say other than pray for divine intervention. I think it would be a blessing to mankind for the truth to come out. It would put us in our place. It would show us our sin, show us our disease, you see.
Right.
And that's a good thing. It
Mhm.
would be a breakthrough of mankind. So let's see what happens.
Right. Now, for those who haven't read your book, they're probably asking the question that you address in the book about other countries that have no reason to want to support us, like Russia, like China. Why wouldn't they expose the lie and put it out for everyone to see in order to give them greater standing in the world as a potential new superpower in the case of China? Why wouldn't they expose the lie?
Yeah, that's kind of a seemingly good argument, but it's really actually superficial. And believe it or not, that's like the number one defense of people.
Mhm.
If they faked it, Russia would have blown the whistle on it. Well, not really. Russia, average person plays chess so much better than Americans play chess. And if I had a picture of a world leader with a prostitute, I could upload it to the internet and bring them down. And then that video or picture's worth nothing. It's now free, whatever. Or I could blackmail them year after year after year. Go to Sabrel.com and find the YouTube link. I just uploaded a video today that I interview someone who works for the Chinese Space Agency. They said everybody there knows that the Apollo missions were fake and that China is blackmailing the United States for illegal space technology that the own congressional laws forbid the United States or any employee of the government or citizen to give to China. And China is milking that information, blackmailing that information out of NASA, that technology, in exchange for keeping the moon landing fraud a secret. The same with Russia. Just in November, they had an AI conference. And, they have conferences for TV equipment and automobiles and shoes. So they had an AI conference where teams of various people from various countries got to play around with the most advanced AI, which is multiple AIs hooked up together. And it's called Google's neural network. It's billions of dollars of research, decades of technology all brought together. And it has a deep fake detection program that has never been wrong. You can feed it a video of Biden or Trump, and in less than a second, it could tell you whether it's real or a deep fake. Well, one team had it write a symphony, another team had it write a novel, and one team fed it pictures of the lunar surface from the unmanned Chinese probes from 2014 of the lunar surface. And it said, are these real? And it said, yes, they're real. Then it fed it just a few months ago pictures from the Apollo missions, and it said they're all fake. Every single one of them is fake, fake background, fake foreground, electrical lighting, not sunlight, this, that, and the other. Now, Putin was there. Go to Sabrel.com, and on the homepage, I show a video of Putin being shown the AI's conclusion. He doesn't look surprised at all. In fact, he looks afraid for the truth to come out. Now, RT, if people think that's an alternative to American media, it's not. They're not your friend. I check it out every now and then because they do cover some interesting things, but they're really all in it together. Just like wrestling matches, where they really aren't hitting one another, where they're, decide in advance who's going to win. That's the world leaders. Okay. The CIA is madly in love with the Chinese government. That's why they're giving them space technology. They have these deals worked out. Well, Russia knows that the moon missions are fake and they're blackmailing us too, because that's a wiser use of the information. And so that doesn't prove that the moon missions are fake. We have an eyewitness in the Chinese Space Agency who says they know it's fake and they're being blackmailed. So that's what they would do with the information to keep it valuable and to not release it. So that doesn't prove anything. And neither does claiming that, 100,000 or however many people worked on the Apollo program, because during World War II, the atomic bomb was like the secret. And it involved over 129,500 people, and yet only 8 people knew what they were building. And the flight director, Eugene Krantz, who I've spoken to, said that a person in the command center in Houston at that computer console can't tell a difference whatsoever between a practice flight and a
Mhm.
quote real flight, just a bunch of numbers going by on a screen. So if they can't tell, I don't think the person making the glove or the door handle or the boot. I mean, come on, do you think the CIA is so stupid to tell 400,000 people, vendors, hot dog vendors outside of NASA, cafeteria employees, secretaries, which is how they pad these numbers, or the guy making the glove or the door handle or the boot? Hey, we're really not going to the moon. Don't tell anybody. I mean, come on. Are they that stupid? And in fact, there's only 3 eyewitnesses going up. And if a person in the command center can't tell a difference, then neither can you watching it as a 10-year-old from your living room. That's like saying what a bank teller knows about corruption in Wells Fargo and the CEO knows are identical. The tellers are clueless.
Right.
So, and how many tellers? If you added up all the tellers at Wells Fargo, let's say Bank of America, I think there's about as many or more than who worked on the Apollo program. Do they really know what's going on in the boardroom and in the mind of the CEO? No, they don't. And there's no independent press coverage. I mean, World War II took place in front of billions of eyewitnesses. This had zero eyewitnesses, zero independent reporters. And in fact, during the landing, they didn't show a live picture. They showed a animation, looked like Atari. I mean, if you're really landing on the moon, I would put a camera on that rocket for the entire time. For however long it takes to get to the moon, tune on your TV, you'll see the moon getting bigger, bigger, and bigger, all the way going down. Why couldn't they do that? They had live, allegedly, radio. They're just a bunch of radio signals. So if the radio signal can be live, why can't a video signal be live? It's still just a radio wave, right? Whether there's video in it or audio, because they couldn't fake it. And so they really did fake the moon landing. It was actually easier because they had complete control over the narrative and people wanted to believe it. The Vietnam War was going on, and Tricky Dick Nixon said that the number one threat during his presidency to the United States was not China, was not Russia, which he visited, right after
Right.
Apollo, being blackmailed. And right after Apollo, he sold grain to the enemy Russia below cost, you see, right after Apollo. And he said, they're not the biggest threat to our country. People protesting the federal government are. That's what he said. So, what better way to have a pep rally than to fake a mission, which would guarantee its success? In fact, President Johnson showed up, as you mentioned, at Cannon Air Force Base to watch the filming of Apollo 11 in 1968. And he was the one who came up with the code name Slam Dunk, meaning it's easy. You want to have a successful moon mission? We can guarantee 100% it'll be successful because we shot it in a film studio in an Air Force Base hangar. And as you know from the book Moon Man, which I read myself in audio, Kindle, or print, Sobral.com, we have an eyewitness who saw them filming it at Cannon Air Force Base, which is the intelligence headquarters of the United States Air Force. And there you go. We have an eyewitness. We have shadows intersecting at 90 degrees,
Mhm.
which cannot happen if it's sunlight. Go to Sobral.com homepage,
Right.
3-minute video. I could show the picture and screen share. I mean, go outside, look at two
Right.
trees, two telephone poles, two people. They're always parallel shadows. They can't intersect. We have shadows intersected at 90 degrees from objects 5 feet apart that they claim are on the moon. I'm a filmmaker. My job is to make fake scenes look real. That's a really close electrical light. I mean, come on.
Right.
That proves it in a court of law. We found classified footage of them faking being halfway to the moon with a 1-foot model of the Earth dated 2 days into the flight. That proves it. We have an eyewitness. That proves it.
Right.
And we have the logic that
That
you
that
can't. Yeah,
that
go ahead.
that video you got, that was fascinating in the book. The,
Which one?
the CIA prompting the astronauts to talk, that film that ended up in your hands, I guess by accident, as you state in the book. To me, that was so explosive of
Yeah.
evidence, and your journey in trying to manage that piece of evidence. As I read that part of your book, I couldn't believe that we were still in America. Some of the things that you had to deal with in
Yeah.
trying to bring that evidence forward, it felt like we were in a completely different world when you get that into that part of the book. I mean, they tried to institutionalize you. I mean, they tried to arrest you. I mean, I thought for sure when I was reading that part of the book, I was like, I hope we have this podcast, because that segment had been, I've been trying to get the podcast back then. You may not have made it. I mean, you took some action to get yourself out of hot water that I think most Americans, if they read the book and see that, they should be afraid.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the analogy people use is a frog. You know, down in Louisiana, people cook frogs, but if you throw the frog in a pot of hot water, it jumps out.
Yeah.
So you put it in room temperature water, and you gradually, ever so slowly, bring it to a boil, puts it to sleep. Next thing you know, it's cooked. It doesn't know it's cooked. It fell asleep. And so we've kind of gradually developed a tyrannical society, and we're just used to it. I went to Fisk University. Okay, that's the a university designed for Black Americans who just were freed from slavery. It was a beautiful school. I was one of the few tall people there. And so, had I not been born around 1965, I would have been there with my black brothers at Walgreens or whatever it was called, Woolsworth back then. I just hate racism. And I'm driving down the street, in Nashville, Tennessee, have one of three tail lights out, but I have a black friend in the car. We get like the third degree. I
Mm.
mean, it's like, what is going on here? And then, as you know, I went to NASA with an appointment with media credentials, right? And I asked an Apollo astronaut whether he really, walked on the moon or orbited the moon. I'm thrown out by security guards. And then I've got this tape that two NBC news directors agreed, proved beyond a doubt that they did fake the moon missions. And I'm literally, trying to get the tape to CNN, and I'm surrounded by government agents. And you read the book and given truth serum and all this stuff. It's like we're in, communist China or North Korea that we always hear, bad things about. And yet they're not faking the moon landing. They're not killing their own president, right? You see, so what's going on here? Something has happened to America, and it has been so gradual, bit by bit. And if you believe in God and spirituality, that's the same thing with Satan. He couldn't beat the disciples, so he created a church, right? And that's a scary thing when you see that Satan has infiltrated almost all Christianity, not to the point where people are deliberately doing evil or deliberately spewing false doctrine, but they do have false doctrine, and they become so accustomed to it, they're defending preachers without actually reading the Bible. My grandmother went to church 7 days a week.
Mm.
That's how devout she was. And then when I became a Christian myself, I wanted to study the Bible with her, make sure, her church was teaching correctly. And she said, us, such and such religion, we're not into reading the Bible.
Mm.
And I'm like, oh, I thought Christianity was based on the Bible. Her religion is the exact opposite. They discourage people to read the Bible. You just do what the guy up front tells you to do and believe what he tells you to believe.
Okay.
And that's what's happened to Americans. They assume that the government has their best interest in mind, but we have to understand there's never been one moment in the entire history of the world where the leaders of the world had the people under them their best interest in mind, right? In the last 100 years, there's been more racist genocide in the last 100 years than in the entire span of history before then. So this is a dangerous time when we have people masquerading as honest people, and they're the exact opposite. And as you know from the book, it'd be one thing if they faked the moon landing and didn't kill a single person. Then maybe it's the sinful part of me. I'd be like, oh, that was pretty clever. Good for them. You know,
You're right. You
you know,
got
I like I like I like puzzles, and one of my favorite movies, I have to admit, is Paper Moon, about this, con man in the 1920s, conning people. And it's not like I think stealing is, not wrong. It is, but it's like, a puzzle solving. How clever that was, kind of clever what he did. And when you hear the story about the people digging from the dry cleaner under the ground into the bank vault and getting the gold, and like, oh, that was pretty clever. However, you don't praise them if they slit the throats of three guards with wives and children, do you?
right.
And when I made the movie, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, and its follow-up film, I was given $1 million by a man who builds rockets for NASA who knows it's fake. And he thought it was his patriotic duty to expose it. And I was doing the film under the theory it might be true. And when I found that tape that you can see at Sabrel.com in the film, a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, right on the homepage, of them faking being halfway to the moon, dated 2 days into the flight with a 1 foot model of the Earth and a third track of audio of the CIA telling them to fake a 4 second radio delay.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh my gosh, they really did fake the moon landing. How sad is that? And when I had all this money backing me, and this film took 7 years to make, and it was 3.5 years into it that I realized they really did fake it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how sad is that? And I was, had a lot of information. I was asked not to put in the movie and not disclose until people had passed away. And now that is in the book for the very first time, including my 4 hour interview with the widow of the man who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon. You see, he was a whistleblower. He knew they could barely get into Earth orbit, and the idea of walking on another world in 2 years' time, he saw as being absolutely impossible. He said they needed a decade more, at least, to pull it off. But no one listened to him because the higher ups knew they weren't going to go. They were preparing the contingency to fake it, but had not at that moment in time told the astronauts. And so a few days before he died, he held an impromptu press conference without permission, where he took a bunch of reporters to the top of the rocket, where he hung a lemon the size of a grapefruit and called the thing a piece of junk on national TV. Days later, he's dead. His wife said, when I interviewed her, that on January 26, 1967, he came home from work and said, Hon, for some strange reason, the CIA is all over the launch pad today inspecting the equipment. I've been here for 3 years, haven't seen the CIA a single time. Why did they show up today? Why are they monkeying around with the equipment today? I wonder why. The very next day, he's dead from faulty equipment. His wife told me he was murdered by the CIA. I'm not saying it, she is.
Right.
So now we have the federal government taking a third of our labor, a third of our sweat, and instead of giving it to our children and grandmothers, we're giving it to them to not only fake moon missions, to murder people because those CIA agents were paid a salary, which came from our hard labor, right?
Right.
So that's the country we have. This country was founded by the Declaration of Independence that said when any nation becomes destructive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Well, they're murdering their own people. What's the first one? Life. They're killing their own people to cover up their crimes. That's a fact. I'm not saying it. The dead man's relatives are saying it. So, the dead man's relatives are saying the CIA killed President Kennedy. The dead man's relatives are saying the man who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon was murdered by the CIA. And it's still officially believed they went to the moon, which means these murderers are at large. You don't have one person killed every month in your neighborhood for 50 years and go, well, it's just one of those things.
Right.
No, you do something about it. The problem is people are spending 40 hours a week watching television and 40 hours a week at work. And then they've got to sleep and do the dry cleaning and
Right. Right.
there's no time to make the world a better place. And that's what they want.
Right.
They want us distracted. And as you know from one of the clips, which you can see for free at Sabrel.com, I think it's the creepiest one. I
Yeah.
mean, you saw the one about the national anthem, right? You
Yeah.
saw that one?
I did.
That's so bizarre. It's hard for me to even realize it's true, but it's right there in front of your eyes. What can you say? I don't know how old you are. I see a little gray hair there. But back in our day, right,
Right.
that the TV stopped around 1 a.m. and picked up again at 5 a.m. And then when they went off the air, they would play the national anthem and show pictures of the Statue of Liberty and the Lincoln Memorial and all that stuff. And so they did that in this video that I have is one of the book links. And in the bottom part of the screen, you see the lyrics of the national anthem. Oh, say, can we see by the dawn's early light? And when the lyrics change, it kind of ripples through, kind of like a Venetian blind. But when you slow it down It's undeniable, hidden subliminally. It says obey, consume, obey. Trust government God. Government is your God. Do people not notice that when our leaders of our country refer to us, they don't call us people, they don't call us citizens, they don't call us Americans, they call us consumers, because that's what they think of us, right? Voting is irrelevant. Ask Bernie Sanders or Ron Paul if voting matters, because Bernie Sanders got twice as many votes as Clinton did and got half as many delegates.
Right.
So how that's legal, I don't know. I think it's illegal. And then instead of the FBI going after that vote rigging, they go after the person who leaked the information about the vote rigging, who
Exactly.
ended up dead from a robbery where they forgot to take his wallet, you
Mm,
know? And then, just a recent story, we have Boeing,
right.
multi-billion dollar, probably over 10 years, multiple trillions of dollars.
Exactly.
And they had two employees who were pointing out they're deliberately, skipping quality control. Both of them end up dead right before they're about to testify. Now, I remember when I worked for NBC, I covered a story that just seemed shocking to me. A Vanderbilt student at the ATM right across from campus getting out $20, shot in the heart for $20. Imagine what people will do for billions and trillions.
Right.
You see?
Absolutely. And I wanted to go back to that murder just so the listeners to the podcast understand what you have in your book and how far the CIA went to silence those astronauts. They were burned alive.
Yeah.
Alive. I mean, that's that when I read that, my mind immediately goes back in time and think about all the people who were falsely accused and burned at the stake. And these men, two of them who probably had no idea of why they were caught up in this, because the astronaut put the lemon and he makes the statement, all three had to die. At least that's what I think
Yeah.
they concluded. And they made it the most painful death I think you could inflict on someone.
Yeah. When he held that press conference and basically stood up to tyranny at NASA, all the other astronauts were, applauding him. Hey, 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 you're good for you. But I'm going to stand over here in case you're struck by lightning. They literally said that. They
Right.
said that. They said, we appreciate that. We love you for saying that, but we're going to stand over here in case you're struck by lightning. They made that joke. So you see, had he had an accident like the two Boeing people, right? A little suspicious. So they killed two other guys with him to make it look more like an accident, like they weren't singling him out after he, blew the whistle on NASA. And that's not the only people that they killed. There's a documentary that Fox did based on my film where they found four other Apollo astronauts and backup crews who died mysteriously within a 24-month period of one another. So you have that plus the three astronauts, you see. So you
Right.
have seven Apollo astronauts dying within 24 months. Now, I think if there was a McDonald's where seven employees had accidents within 24 months, I think the homicide police would be all over the place
Exactly.
interviewing people until they got to the end of it. And yet that never happened. And then in my book, I don't actually put it in the book, but because the son of this man was still alive, but the eyewitness to the moon landing fraud being filmed was the chief of security at Cannon Air Force Base. And as he's dying, fearing the judgment of God, the first thing he says is that he killed somebody. He wanted to get that off his chest. And his son is like, well, who did you kill? He's like, well, I murdered a coworker at Cannon Air Force Base. And I verified all this. The son lived right across from Cannon Air Force Base. His father was chief of security. Here's his military police ID and uniform. And the son brought in the military police to his father's deathbed to give this victim's family closure. And they asked him, who did you kill? So and so. And then they said, well, why did you kill him? He said, well, we eyewitnessed them filming a fake moon landing set June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1968, where they falsified the TV images of the moon landing. We were told we would be killed if we told anybody. My coworker thought it was morally wrong. He was going to tell a reporter, and I killed him to keep it a secret.
Mhm.
And he kept as a souvenir a list of 15 people that President Johnson gave him who are allowed to come in. Neil Armstrong's on the list, Buzz Aldrin is on the list, President Johnson is at the top of the list, James Van Allen of the Van Allen radiation belt, which is one of the reasons they can't go to the moon to this day. Eugene Kranz is on the list. Uh, what is it? Werner von Braun is on the list, and all these people were there, and some people I never heard of. Science fiction writer was there, some CIA people, naval intelligence people were there, a retired general was there, and they faked the moon landing. We have an eyewitness, and it's very simple. Even though we have shadows intersecting at 90 degrees that they claim is lit by sunlight, which is always parallel, that in and of itself proves it scientifically in a court of law that this photograph that they claim was on the moon was lit by an electrical light. It's right there in the picture. That's the only way the shadows can intersect at 90 degrees from 5 feet apart is an
Yeah,
electrical light, which means they didn't go to the moon.
that's
So
right.
there you go. And then, as you know, the footage that convinced me of them using a 1-foot model faking being halfway to the moon, that proves it. We have an eyewitness that proves it. And we have logic because today, with 50 years better rockets and computers, the farthest that NASA can send an astronaut into space is 1,000th the distance to the moon. So what they're really claiming is with 1960s technology, when all the computers combined had 1 millionth the computing power of a cell phone, they went on the first attempt ahead of schedule 1,000 times farther into space than they can go today with 5 decades better technology.
Right,
So, for the first time in history, technology was greater in the past than it is now, which has never happened and is a scientific and
right,
historic possibility because the atomic bomb, when they blew that up just 10 years later, atomic bombs were 1,000 times more explosive. So if they could go to the moon on the first attempt, we would have been on Mars 10 years later. We'd be in another solar system by now, and there'd be bases all over the moon. Today, they can only send mannequins to orbit the moon, and yet somehow they can drive cars and play golf on the moon with 1960s technology. Can you fly an airplane over the Atlantic today? Because that breakthrough was in 1927? Sure, you can. Can you turn on a light bulb today? Sure, you can. But for some reason, you can't get in a rocket ship and go to the moon. You can only go 1,000th the distance to the moon, even though you have 5 decades better technology. And now they can only send mannequins to orbit the moon. They don't have enough fuel. They don't have radiation protection. I mean, Elon Musk said to go to the moon, you have to make 8 fuel trips first. They never did that, did they? We have a video of a NASA employee reminding people who don't know that high above the atmosphere is this 30,000-mile thick radiation belt that you'd have to go through to the moon. Every manned mission except going to the moon has been below it. And that the technology to protect yourself from the radiation has not been invented yet. Okay,
right,
then how did Apollo astronauts and of course, we have them faking being halfway to the moon from Earth orbit, proving they never even left Earth orbit. And
right,
here we are 50 years later, and they still cannot leave Earth orbit. It can't be done.
right. I
And
mean,
if it
Van
weren't
Allen
for
has themselves,
yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah,
just
they
can't
don't have enough
do it.
fuel for one.
Right.
They don't have protection from the radiation is another.
Hmm.
And uh, to rendezvous in the computer power, they probably don't have the technology to land a rocket vertically. I mean, with 1 millionth the computing power of a cell phone, they said they landed a rocket vertically every time that they tried.
Right.
On the and today, with 50 years better technology and 600 million times more computing power,
Hmm.
the first time Elon Musk tried to land a rocket vertically, it blew up. The second time it blew up. The third time it blew up. The fourth time it blew up. It took him 5 attempts to land a rocket vertically with 600 million times more computing power. So, how could they do that back in 1969 flawlessly every time?
Right.
There's many reasons why they technically couldn't go to the moon. Not just the fuel, not just the radiation. The lunar lander
They
just couldn't do it.
couldn't do it. Right.
That's like Santa Claus's sleigh.
Mm,
It's about as technically advanced as that and as imaginary.
right.
And so people just assumed it could do what it could do. And they were run by a bunch of liars who, if you didn't comply, you were killed. And no independent press coverage. And here we are those years later. And like you said, surely these people knew that eventually the lie would come out, but you didn't add the reason why they did it is selfishly. They figured by the time that happened, they would be dead, let someone else deal with it.
Right.
And
And that's
they
what's
said,
getting me because they've invested $100 billion in this Artemis uh, unmanned, a manned orbit around the moon, and then a planned landing on the moon, knowing everything that we just discussed. They're going to go spend another $100 billion to not get to the moon. They know that. So are they teeing up another possible fake landing? Could they possibly get away with it a second time?
they might be able to, but there'd be probably too much scrutiny. They've said they're going to return to the moon about 10 times within a 5-year period. So many presidents back in the 90s said they were going to return to the moon in 5 years, couldn't do it. Clinton said it, Bush said it. They never keep a goal. Somehow you can go to the moon in only 8 years with 1960s technology, and now with 5 decades better technology, you can't go to the moon in 20 years, because they said more than 20 years ago they were going to return to the moon by the year 2000. And so that never happened. And yet they had 20 years to do it. And yet they still couldn't do it. And somehow we did it in 8 years on the first attempt. So, yeah, they didn't go. People are defending King George. They're defending the lying moon landing because it's a
Right.
pleasant lie and because they don't want to admit that they're wrong. And that's what Carl Sagan says. The bamboozle has captured them. It's too painful to admit, even to ourselves, that we've been taken. And that's why all these, Boy Scout people who have, one degree in this, that, or the other have tunnel vision and have made a god out of putting man on the moon. And as you know, from a spiritual point of view, the fact that mankind's greatest accomplishment, putting a man on the moon by the most powerful nation on earth, you see, is a fabrication.
Right.
When Lucifer, the father of lies, runs the world, it kind of makes spiritual sense. Whether or not that truth will come out, I don't know. I suspect they're going to keep postponing, quote, returning to the moon until we have some sort of comet or asteroid hit the Earth and destroy the power grid, which means electricity won't be able to have water come out of the faucet. And so when people are dying off in the millions and billions and there's not clean drinking water, I don't think anyone's going to care who killed Kennedy or whether they went to the moon or not. So I suspect they're just going to keep postponing it until such an event.
Right.
And such an event could be closer than you think.
Right. Now, you make a powerful argument in your book, Moon Man, about how they use those unaccounted funds. And I think that's why they keep throwing a possible moon landing out over and over. Because if you can get away with getting Congress to appropriate $100 billion for a mission that you know is not going to happen, some of that can be siphoned off, as you imply in the book, to be invested in other ways to suppress the American public, surveilling the public by buying companies that have access to your data, as you mentioned in the book. So this 93 billion that they've spent on this Artemis mission, I think they're preparing for the day where they do believe that the American public will wake up to the lies, but we won't have any recourse because they'll control every way that we can possibly have access to work, funds, and our information. And they've pretty much dug their way in. If what we read in your book, if they own the companies, the CIA owned the companies that you mentioned in the book, I just had to take a I just leaned back in my chair and I was just like, what? If that's happening, the future for America is already written.
Yeah, the book of Revelation says that the plagues come, the tribulation comes to help wake people up and to prick them toward repentance. It also says that people, most of them, will not repent anyway.
Right.
So we have the free will to repent or not, and God knows in advance what we're going to choose, which is most people are not going to repent. Jesus was asked about the last days, and he said, it will get so bad, I believe, because we'll have multiple bad events happening simultaneously. We'll have economic collapse and pandemic and food shortages and meteor showers, you see, all at once. And he says about those times, greater tribulation than the entire history of the world. And unless God intervenes, no one will survive. So I take that to mean the evil people are going to win. So be it. What good is it to gain the world and forfeit your soul?
Right.
They did a great job killing Kennedy. They did a great job with the Gulf of Tonkin. They did a great job with the moon landing. They did a great job with this little thing for the last 3 years. And they're going to keep going on. And it looks like getting better and better at lying, murdering, and killing the people under their care. And so be it. They will gain the world and forfeit their soul. What did Paul say, or sorry, Peter in the book of Acts, first preached message, save yourself from this corrupt generation.
Hmm.
What must we do? Repent and then be baptized.
Right.
Don't get baptized without repenting, otherwise it's like going swimming, not going to do much good. And
Right.
then Jesus said in Matthew 24 that wickedness will become so commonplace even in the church
Right.
that the love of most believers will grow cold. But he who holds to the very end will be saved. We have to get saved and we have to stay saved because Hebrews 10 says you can lose your salvation. If we deliberately go on sinning after knowledge of the truth, no salvation blood is left, only a fearful expectation of a consuming fire from God. So get right with God, stay right with God, let those people gain the world and lose their soul, so be it. God's not going to let wicked people live forever. And so we're very close. I was laying in bed meditating a few days ago, and, it's like heaven so close, for me personally,
Hmm.
as a mortal being and in time of last days, it's so close. So close. We're so close. Let's not give up when we're this close to the end. And fortunately, Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And really, sin is more difficult than righteousness. Such a heavy price. Such a heavy price. So many relationships I ruined from my drunkenness and immorality, and relationships I ruined from my sin. That was more difficult
Hmm.
than being honest and doing things the right way. And fortunately, God is patient with me as I am a slow learner sometimes. But it really is, turning to God and living a godly life is so much easier than sinning. It has such a price on our body and our mind and our souls and our relationships and our peace. It's just not worth it. And so what can you do? They did fake the moon landing. It is symbolic, really, of the fall of man. And I pray that the truth will come out to humble us, to show us our mistakes, and so we can learn a lesson from it. Until the truth is known, we're not going to move forward. We're stuck. The needle is skipping on this place in history. All the while, the needle is getting clogged up with with lint, which is our emboldened, murderous, criminal gangster government
Right.
taking more and more and more advantage of the people under their care.
Right.
When President Clinton, after denying he had an affair 20 times, finally admitted it, someone asked him, well, why did you do it? And he said, because I could.
Hmm.
Because I could get away with it. Why did they fake the moon landing? Because they could. Why did they kill Kennedy? Because they could. The sad thing is, the president before Kennedy, a general who was in charge of D-Day, he was president for 8 years. And on his way out, last day in office, says, oh, by the way, government is being taken over by dark, evil forces. Good luck.
Right.
Why didn't he say that when he was
Yeah,
president for 8 years?
exactly.
Think about that. You,
Exactly.
you see what he did is he made a selfish decision that he wanted to not be killed by those people and to enjoy retirement with his grandchildren. But did he gain the world and lose his soul? Because Jesus says if you lay down your life for other people, you will gain it for eternity. And if you hold on to your life, you will lose it for eternity. He should have done something about it. And that's what we have to realize. We're gonna die anyway.
Right.
And as you know from the book, I turned down making the movie originally. I
Mhm.
thought, something doesn't smell right about this Apollo thing. I
Right.
better not start digging up these bones because if they didn't go and they really did fake it, that could be dangerous. I'm not going to
Right.
risk my life for what Nixon did. No, thank you. But after reading the Bible 5 times from cover to cover, developed a conviction in me of right and wrong and a judgment to come, and I realized I'm going to die anyway,
Right.
right? I want to be a coward, right? And the last part of Revelation lists again for about the 400th time the type of behavior, if you're unrepentant of, will prevent you from taking hold of the free gift of eternal life: sexual immorality, lying, drinking, whatever. But the first is the cowardly will not enter the kingdom of heaven.
Mhm.
You see, I've been cowardly, and we can't live that way. Because people who are willing to die for what is right is what we need. Our country got started because of our founding mothers and fathers who said enough is enough.
Right.
We're willing to die. And people aren't willing to die anymore. And it's my suspicion it's because no one believes in God anymore. And if you don't believe in God, all you got is your house and your car and your job and your paycheck. And yes, sir, don't rock the boat. Keep my mouth shut. Ignore the evil, don't do anything about it. Even a general made that decision.
Right.
And it cost the lives of 300 million American slaves in the process.
Right.
Because if you have to ask permission to go to church, permission to have 5 people instead of 4 at your son's birthday party. If one group of people is telling another group of people, you can't have your wedding, you can't go to church, and then later you can have your wedding, but you can't dance, and you can now go to church, but you can't sing, then one group of people is the master and the other group of people are the slaves. How did
Exactly.
that become commonplace? I just
Right.
don't know,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
So, I don't know what to say. I don't care if 9 out of 10 people are dropping dead from some boogie illness circling the globe.
Right.
It's still your right to go shopping under those circumstances, and it's still the right of a shop owner to open his business. He still has 10% of the population and needs tuna fish and toilet paper, right?
Right.
One group of people can't tell another people they can't leave their house and they have to do this or that. That's slavery.
That's right.
What happened to freedom? You can
Exactly.
advise. You can give us an advice if you want.
Right.
For the advice, I
Right.
respectfully agree or
Exactly. Me
disagree.
too. I
Live
mean, I
with
told
it.
people through the whole thing. I said, guess what? I'm gonna die. One way or the other, I'm gonna die. But I'm gonna
So
go.
you might as well go out in a blaze of glory for
That's right.
God and for what is right. And even if you don't believe in God,
Right.
history will remember your decision.
That's correct.
And you're going to either go down with the cowardly, evil people or the people who took a stand for what is right. How do you want to be remembered?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Question for you. What's next?
Well, I hardly am ever asked that question, Mark Anthony. To tell you the truth, I would love to answer that question. Well, my dream, what does it say? Put God first and he'll give you the desires of your heart. So I'm going to claim that promise, Lord. My dream is to make a feature film, an inspirational feature film. I
Oh,
love drama, I love comedy, I love a film that has both in it. My favorite genre is probably fantasy. I don't know if you ever saw the film Big Fish. It's a recent one, or Stranger Than Fiction.
yeah.
It's kind of like a Twilight Zone kind of story.
Oh,
And I would call it a spiritual fantasy. I've written a screenplay indirectly based on the man who confessed to murdering a coworker. It's not about the moon landing fraud, but it's about a murderer repenting because he's terminally ill. And the spiritual implications of that and what's going on in the world at the time. It's called Silence in Heaven. And it's a secular movie that I hope is inspirational. We're trying to raise $5 million for it. There's a fairly well-known actor. Now, don't get mad if you don't agree with him politically. That's irrelevant. We're supposed to love everybody, right? His name
Exactly.
is Ron Perlman. He's, played Hellboy and Sons
Yeah,
of
I love
Anarchy.
Ron Perlman. Yeah.
And he says it's the best screenplay or one of the best he's ever read and can't wait to star in it and produce it. But that was 2 years ago, right around the time of
Mm.
the actor strike started. And now we're kind of stuck. We're trying to raise $5 million to make that movie. If I make that movie, if the CIA, if you're listening, I'll shut up and never talk about the moon landing ever again. I'll just go on to making feature films and I won't bother you anymore.
Well, I'll keep
So
talking about your documentaries and the moon landing, and then you can talk about your new movie at that point.
yeah,
How about I'll pick up the flag on that, and then you'll have a new flag to plant.
yeah, there we go.
Perfect.
So that's what I would like to do.
Excellent.
And so, I've been an actor and writer and filmmaker all my life, and I've done dramatic reenactments and short films. However, I'd like to tell a full story, and I've already written it, and we've got a budget, and let's see if we can make it. We'll
We'll
see.
put those blessings out
I
there
like
for
to do
you,
it.
and hopefully, all of that happens. Because for those of you who are considering reading the book, please do, because the journey that you went on to bring this truth forward is one that like you said, I don't think most Americans would take on that cross. And so I want to thank you for doing that and for continuing to bring that truth to light, because it will set us free if we choose to humble ourselves enough and accept it. But we got to be willing to do all the things you just outlined here on the podcast in terms of having that courage, that conviction, that faith to know that that's the right path. And I know it's scary for a lot of people to think that the government is willing to pull that sort of crime against the people, but the evidence is just too overwhelming to not see the reality. Mr.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say in Obadiah, it says that pride blinds people from seeing the truth. And pride is simply the unwillingness for me to admit that I'm wrong.
Right.
And God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. And so I worshiped the moon landings, as you know from the book. And to go from that to having to face facts and admit it and then become the leading spokesperson saying, look, they really did fake the moon landing. And as you know from watching the film, a funny thing happened on the way to the moon. It has a, pretty direct spiritual opening and metaphors for how this is symbolic,
Mhm.
mankind's greatest accomplishment. And you can watch that film at Sabrel.com, and it's one of my best movies. And you'll see the proof that convinced you in the movie of them faking being halfway to the moon during the flight, meaning they couldn't even go halfway, which means they didn't go. And then when it dawns on you, they really did fake it. The greatest nation on earth, the most symbolic accomplishment of mankind. Wow, these people are running the show right now.
Right.
What else are they lying about? You
Right.
see?
And I think that's why they were so aggressive in trying to suppress the truth you were trying to bring forward. This nation is built on the full faith and credit of the United States. And if you pull that thread, you pull one lie, one thread of a lie, I think they are afraid that you will unravel the entire blanket. Because, like you said, if you're willing to lie about that, are you lying about other things that give us that full faith and credit in the United States? And you knock over enough dominoes, they'll all fall.
Yeah, well, what can you do? We live in a fallen world, and it is what it is. Better
Right.
to know the truth,
Right.
even if it's a sad truth. What does it say? The bitterest truth is better than the sweetest lie.
That's right. That's
Have
absolutely
to
right.
have that type of heart. That's the heart of God
That's
and the
right.
true seeker.
That's right. Mr. Sabrell, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. In addition to learning about the moon landing, I am now spiritually full. I absolutely appreciate the lessons that you have imparted to me today on how I should think about and bring forward my own courage and not be afraid to live, to really live, and live with truth in mind, which you've done for a large majority of your life. So again, thank you for being the example, for being the virtual mentor, and thank you for bringing truth to light.
No problem. If you want to see it for yourself, just go to Sabrell.com.
Absolutely. Now we'll put all of that in the show notes, link to his website, as well as other information linked out from the website. You got to get over to Sabrell.com. You got to order this book, read the book, and be prepared to be overwhelmed with certain parts. But I loved it. Check out my review on Goodreads.com. You'll see exactly what I feel about it and what I think about Mr. Sabrell. So thank you again, sir, and good luck with your feature film.
Oh, thank you. God bless. Please pray for it. Silence in heaven.
We will. We will absolutely pray for it. Let me stop the recording.